He's responded to me. I'm going to let you know what his response is, and I'm going to respond to it live on the air. I had the opportunity to engage with Bishop Jaxi. Now, Bishop Jaxi is not a bishop, I'm sure. And Bishop Jaxi uses a helmeted crusader as his thing on X. Pretty certain this guy has said that I was responsible for his conversion to Catholicism. I love when people do that. You helped me to convert to, then fill in the blank. You helped me to become a Muslim. You helped me to become a Jehovah's Witness. You helped me to become a Mormon, blah, 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 Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, blah, 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 blah. And, you know, I keep saying, look, guys, grow up. You're demonstrating you're still in the convert stage and you're really not stable yet and may never be stable. But so I've been used to hearing this. It's an old ploy. And when I push back to these folks, a few of them will respond. But the vast majority just shrink into the shrubbery and disappear. So this Bishop Jaxi guy wrote a post, and it said this. And again, this is stuff that I think all of us need to be prepared to respond to whether we respond to it directly to them or if we have people in our churches asking these questions. You know, that's why I bring this stuff up. It's hopefully somewhat representative. In the Protestant world, you can find Arians, modalists, Marcionites, Gnostics, Pelagians, and endless hybrids. Every one of them holds up a Bible and says, Scripture clearly teaches our view and accuses the others of rejecting the Bible. The problem is not just that these groups exist. The problem is that under Sola Scriptura, there is no visible binding authority that can actually settle the dispute. Functionally, each person or each pulpit becomes the final court of appeal. So, tell me again how Sola Scriptura does not create chaos when this is the reality. Now, Sola Scriptura, blueprint for anarchy. Patrick Madrid, decades ago. Nothing has changed. And, I pointed out, I immediately responded to this by saying, well, just look at the people you listed. You listed Gnostics as Protestants. What? The Arians? Modalists? Marcionites? As Protestants? Oh, okay. So in other words, it's the old 32,000 denominations thing, even though I think it's now, I've seen massively inflated numbers, but at least 64, 68,000, blah, 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 blah. That number they love throwing around that if you actually look it up says there's, hundreds of Roman Catholic denominations and includes Gnostics and Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and people that aren't even close to being even nominally Protestant. So immediately, it's hard to take anyone seriously that throws that out there. They're clearly just meme-driven. They haven't done any research of their own. They haven't done any study of their own. They're just doing their thing. And then the other thing is the Protestant world. And everyone needs, you need to think this through. Don't tune out on me here. The Protestant world, what is that? See, Roman Catholics like to compare and contrast Roman Catholicism with Protestantism. The problem is that's apples and oranges. Roman Catholicism has a visible head and organization and official defining documents. Protestantism does not, because Protestantism isn't a church. I mean, I've explained many times where Protestantism came from, that it was a technical term that had to do with the diets in the Holy Roman Empire and a minority protesting the action of the majority, and that's where it came from. It wasn't even that they were protesting Roman Catholicism. That's not even where it came from. It has come to mean those types of things, but anyway. So there is no Protestant church. Well, I imagine there's a church someplace that calls it the Protestant church. It's all Protestant church, but there is no head of the Protestant church, or a group of people that are the head, or a council of bishops, or anything like that. it's far more useful and logical to compare and contrast those groups that believe and practice sola scriptura, that believe that the Christian scriptures are the sole infallible rule of faith of the church, and seek to practice that. You actually know what it means. If you've got a group that is so disconnected with history that they wouldn't know what sola scriptura actually meant or means, they're not going to be trying to apply it. So in many instances, unfortunately, a large number of charismatics do not believe in sola scriptura. First of all, large majority don't know about it. They're not concerned about history or their connection to the Reformation. But they're constantly saying, the Lord said this, and the Lord said that, and the Lord said this, and the Lord said that. And you've got a functional, continuing revelation. You know, people like Kenneth Copeland. I mean, you can't convince me that Kenneth Copeland believes in sola scriptura, or maybe has even never heard of it. If you put all the things that Kevin Copeland has said, the Lord told me, into a book, they'd be as long as the Bible, easily. So what you should do, if you want to have a meaningful comparison, is you should compare those groups that believe in sola scriptura, practice sola scriptura, seek to be consistent with it, with those groups that have an external, infallible authority to define doctrine. So compare them. Now, they won't do it. Why? Easy. Groups that claim to be Christian and have external infallible authorities would include the Roman Catholic Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Mormon Church. See, there's all sorts of churches that claim to have a prophet, an apostle, a group of them, all sorts of them. And so they can't even agree on whether there's one God or not. The groups that practice sola scriptura have great unity on a vast majority of issues. We're all monotheists, we're all Trinitarians, we all believe in the resurrection. I mean, we disagree on baptism, on certain aspects of sacramentology, and when we debate on the basis of Scripture. And Roman Catholics go, well, but see, you still have disagreements. Well, so do you, and you shouldn't. If your system is specifically capable of providing an apostolic answer for all the questions, there should be no disagreements, but there are all sorts of them. So, I said, I responded to that. And then he then responded. Well, what happened was I responded to that before I left on the trip. And he then responded to me, and I saw a text someplace where he was saying crickets or something like. He was saying that I could not answer his questions. And the fact of the matter is, I was traveling, and I don't read Twitter posts while I'm on the road. Well, normally not, anyway. And certainly don't respond to them. And so I responded to him with a fairly lengthy discussion about all the stuff that I just talked to you about. Okay? I guess I could have just read that. If you don't follow me on Twitter, then I just sort of gave you the summary of that. And one of the things I pointed out in my response was just recent papal statements that have created a firestorm of disagreement within Roman Catholicism. So the change on capital punishment, I think that's an extremely clear and cogent example of how what was considered apostolic tradition and belief, defined in the Catechism of the Council of Trent, hundreds of years later, is all of a sudden always sinful. If you had asked someone the year 1600 about capital punishment, they would have said, the church says this. Now the church says the opposite of that. So which one's true? Well, it's all based on, it's all based on apostolic tradition and blah, 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 blah. It's not. Obviously it isn't. But then we talked about fiducia supplicans and the firestorm that brought out. And then the statement on Mary just a few weeks ago, and the number of people that continue to reject what the Pope said there. And then we haven't covered this yet. We need to. Got to see if Jason Wallace would like to come on the program and talk about this, because Jason Wallace put out a video about the Filioque clause in the later Nicene Creed in opposition to Eastern Orthodox polemics about it. Well, it's really interesting. It really seems like there is a planned ecumenical movement between Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism, because it really seems that the Marian document, which addressed one of the key divisions, stumbling blocks in ecumenism between Rome and the Eastern Orthodox churches, and now this statement about the Nicene Creed, where the version used in the document does not contain the Filioque clause, because it's the Nicene Constantinopolitan version, and that wasn't there. It was added later. And people are saying, oh, that's no big deal. No, there were statements in the document itself about disagreements over issues that are not definitional. Well, believe you me, the Filioque clause has been definitional for both Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox. I mean, the amount of vitriol and condemnation and anathemas that have flown back and forth across the Bosphorus over whether you have "and the Son" in your version of the Nicene Creed is epic. And now we're being told it's something to be discussed? Well, again, history, it was all signaled at the beginning, folks. It was all signaled at the beginning of Leo's papacy. When one of the first things he does is he says that John Henry Cardinal Newman is going to be made a doctor of the church. That was the big signal. We're seeing that now. Vatican II could not have taken place without John Henry Cardinal Newman and the development hypothesis, which he himself created. There are people that talked about development before that, but not the way that Newman did. I've been criticized for that. It's like, oh, come on, get serious. There are lots of Roman Catholics that fully recognize the validity of this point. And so when one of the first things that Leo does is to say, we're going to make John Henry Cardinal Newman one of the doctors of the church, that is a signal that there's going to be more development coming. And that would open the door to allow for the kind of ecumenical rethinking of the deposit of faith. It's wonderful how Rome comes up with these phrases to get around stuff. In other words, it's doctrinal development away from what was once believed. But they don't want to say that. They don't want to say we're changing our theology, because we can't. It's apostolic. No, it just demonstrates that apostolic within Roman Catholicism has no objective meaning. There is no objective oral apostolic tradition. There just isn't. They get to make it up as they go along. That's what the bodily assumption was. That's what the Immaculate Conception was. That's how they're functioning. They can functionally have new revelation. Now, they don't want to admit that, but they just use these buzzwords to get around it. And so there would have to be things that Rome is going to go, going to have to put on the table as discussable. Not necessarily negotiable, but discussable. And the Eastern Orthodox churches have to do the same thing. Well, for centuries, that simply wasn't even possible to conceive of having that happen. And it is true, Rome has Newman, so Rome can do doctrinal development. But Eastern Orthodoxy, I've said many times, I think is just too brittle. And when I say brittle, what I'm saying is Eastern Orthodoxy, as I see it, and this is only being confirmed by my continuing studies in Eastern Orthodoxy, Eastern Orthodoxy historically is frozen in time. Eastern Orthodox theology is the theology of the Byzantine political empire in the year 800. Okay, that's what it is. And from their perspective, that's good. Unchanging, the ancient church standing in the midst of time. Now, 800 is a whole lot younger than 100, older than younger than 100. So that doesn't make it apostolic. But from their perspective, hey, we're, it's been 1,200 years where we believe the exact same things. Well, okay, that doesn't mean the apostles taught that, and that's the problem. But because they are so, there's no room for development. Not in the old style orthodoxy. Now, the current patriarch of Constantinople might be open to some of that, though from my perspective, that may be exactly how you create schism, and will some of those patriarchates divide off if there's any type of major compromise on something? I don't know. Good questions, but it does seem to me that there's probably a move toward ecumenism taking place in all of that. Anyways, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to spend all that time talking about that stuff. So this Bishop Jaxi guy, I responded. I talked about this stuff. I talked about those documents. That's how I got onto this now that I remember it. The stuff on Mary and the ecumenism and the filioque. Just last week that document was released, and what that may or may not mean. All these things have caused tremendous debate and division within Roman Catholicism that Rome does not have the ability to end. You can pretend, well, we have a source that'll tell us, blah, blah, blah. No, you don't. No, you don't. It doesn't work that way. I just, when he made that statement, part of my response was Pelosi, Biden. What do I mean by that? Biggest promoters of the murder of unborn children in the world. And Pope Francis gives them the Eucharist. Rome's position isn't clear. When does Rome discipline people for their theology and their actions? As long as they're politicians, they don't. What does that tell you about what they actually believe? Seems pretty obvious to me. So what I'm going to do here is he's responded to me. I'm going to let you know what his response is, and I'm going to respond to it live on the air. So here was his initial question. Under Sola Scriptura isn't something you get under, by the way. Who has God-given authority to say you are outside the apostolic faith in a way that binds anyone beyond your own followers? Okay? Now, once again, this is a question for which he has no answer from his own position. So it's invalid to begin with. So it would be rhetorical or theoretical. But the point is, he is making a claim that he has a God-given authority, or his church has a God-given authority to say you're outside the apostolic faith. And certainly Rome has said that. Problem is, Rome has said that to people that today she's no longer saying it to. And she might say it today to someone, and 10 years from now say, oh, we were wrong. They never say we were wrong. We have further meditated upon the content of the depositive faith. is how Rome says, we're going to change that. Okay? So if I'm correct in remembering that he is himself a convert, then this is the convert syndrome. It is, I'm going to accept the authority claims of the group that I've joined. And when it's pointed out to me that, for example, my choice to accept those claims was a fallible choice, and therefore it's my ultimate authority stands upon a fallible foundation, I'm just going to ignore it. I'm just going to walk right past it, and that's what they do. You said he wrote you wrote a lot about your travel schedule. No, I mentioned the fact that I had one paragraph that said you shouldn't be complaining that I can't respond to your question when I'm on a 3,000-mile road trip, and responding to you on X is not my highest priority. Bad Catholic schools. Well, who are you to say they're bad Catholic schools? You call yourself Bishop Jaxi. I don't think you're a bishop, are you? Well, where do you serve? What church do you serve? What's your real name if you're claiming to be a bishop? How do you get to determine they're bad Catholic schools? And how come the Pope keeps taking people from bad Catholic schools and putting them on the Papal Biblical Commission? Why did Francis do that? Why is Leo doing that? Who do you get to determine bad Catholic schools? Rome seems to think they're good Catholic schools because they use their scholars and make them bishops, real bishops. Liberal theologians, again, you mean like Francis? Like Leo? Like the head of the Congregation for the Faith? Who himself identified himself as being more liberal than Pope Francis? A liberation theologian? This is convert syndrome on steroids. This is a Protestant bringing his Protestantism into Catholicism and saying, I get to choose what flavor of Catholicism I'm going to say is the one true flavor, while the leadership of the church says otherwise. Think about that. That's pretty amazing. Francis? Yeah. You think I'm the only person that brought up Francis as an example of tremendous change? Pelosi? Her bishop forbade her to take the Eucharist because of her promotion of sinful acts. And Francis gave her the Eucharist in Rome, undercutting the bishop. Yeah, I brought that up because it's extremely relevant. Fiducia supplicans, Marian dogmas, and more. Yep, all of which demonstrated that you don't have an answer to the question you are actually pretending to ask. The objection you're making. Your own system is contradicted by it because you don't have what you think you have. This is the essence of Roman Catholic apologetics. We have what you don't have. Just don't look at the man behind the curtain. Just don't look at the state of the modern Roman Catholic Church. Don't look at the current Pope. Don't look at the people that he puts in positions of authority. Ignore all that and just listen to us. That's how it works. But you still do not answer that question. You never name a concrete person, office, or body in your system that can give such a judgment with real God-given authority for the whole church. In a word, Dr. White, you dodged, which was predicted and sadly very unfortunate. And again, I point out that his question is invalid. He is clearly assuming something that's untrue and has been disproven. He's assuming he has it and he doesn't have it. So that makes the question invalid, first of all. I have answered this question in many, many, many different contexts. He says he's listened to all these debates, all the rest of the stuff. Okay, fine. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know. But what is being asked for is something that God has not given us. So he's demanding something. And religions for years have given us people who will stand up and I'll give you something that God never gave the church. And I've given examples of this. And I've preached about this and I've taught about this. And, again, I'm fairly certain, if I'm wrong about this, I apologize. But I'm fairly certain this guy had said that you helped convert me to Catholicism, all the rest of the stuff. If that's the case, then he is well aware of the fact that I have repeatedly pointed to the parallel between Acts chapter 20 and 2 Timothy chapter 3, where in writing to Timothy, in his last letter to Timothy, Paul, warning of the rise of apostates and heretics within the church and the difficult times that were to come, directed Timothy not to the Bishop of Rome, not to the successors of Peter, not to a magisterium, none of which even existed in that time, but to a source. Man of God, go to that which is theopneustos. Go to that which is God-breathed. Go to that which can equip you for every good work you've been called to do in the church. That's what you do, man of God. And when Paul met with the Ephesian elders in Acts chapter 20, what does he do? He says, I know that men are going to arise from your very ranks. Yes, the very ranks of elders trained for 3 years by the Apostle Paul. 3 years he trained these men. And he said, I know that men will arise from your own ranks that will not spare the flock. They'll draw disciples after themselves. And in the midst of that dire prediction, what does he say? I commend you to God and the word of his grace, which is able to build you up and to give you the inheritance amongst the saints. He doesn't say, we're establishing a magisterium. It's going to be centered in Rome. It's going to be the successors of Peter. Nothing, even hinting at such an idea. And so what this man wants is what is more than what God has provided. It's not God's intention that there be this group that can go stamp here, bad stamp there, reject here, accept there, because we've seen what that does. We've seen that happen in history. And we've seen what it's done with Roman Catholicism. We've seen the blood on the hands of the Roman Catholic Church when its magisterium says, you're outside the apostolic faith, you're going to die now. Ask Jan Hus, as he's burned at the Council of Constance, the very same council that healed the papacy. The papacy could not heal itself. The Babylonian captivity of the church, that great papal schism, the papacy was helpless to heal itself. The Council of Constance had to heal that schism. And that's the same council that burned Jan Hus for believing what Paul taught in the book of Romans. So we know what happens. We've seen what happens when you have people who decide that they're going to give us more than what God has given us in his word and his spirit. And that's what this man wants. Saying there is no Protestant world actually proves my point. There may be no single Protestant church, but there is obviously a Protestant ecosystem. Ecosystem? People, churches, seminaries, ministries, conferences, all claiming the Reformation and Sola Scriptura. No, they do not. No, they do not. That's false, and you should know that it's false. The vast majority of quote-unquote Protestant churches today, they don't know anything about the Reformation. And they do not understand or practice Sola Scriptura. You're just wrong. You just don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what church you came from or whatever else is, or maybe you're just reading Jimmy Akin all the time. I don't know. Inside that world, you have Arians, Unitarians, Oneness Pentecostals, Classic Trinitarians, Calvinists, Arminians, etc., all holding up the same Bible and saying it clearly teaches our view. Okay, at this point, you just put your hands up and you go, okay, so what you're insisting on doing, the only way your argument works, because it's a bad argument, it's refuted by your own experience, it's refuted by your own church, you recognize that you can't answer the questions you're asking from your side in any meaningful fashion. Because if you say, well, we just listen to what Pope Leo says, then you now have him contradicting all these popes and councils that came before, and now you got to try to answer that, and you can't, and you know it. Okay, so that's what you're doing. So what you've got to do is you've got to force your opponent into a position that is not his. Arians are not Protestants. Unitarians are not Protestants. Oneness Pentecostals are not Protestants. They're not even, they're not Trinitarians. So they're not Protestants. So to demand that we have to be accountable, and in fact, to demand that Sola Scriptura is what gives rise to this, is simply absurd. And everybody needs to understand why that is. Now, look, you can't make people online honest. You can't make them people who have ears to hear. But for yourself, you need to be able to recognize this kind of horrific type of non-reasoning and be able to explain it to others. Because there may be there may be people in your church that just are a little weak on church history, or very weak on church history, and maybe a little weak on their history of the Reformation or whatever else. And so people who listen to this program regularly know that we deal a lot with church history. We talk a lot about church history. We have for decades, absolutely decades. And so we want to be able to give people a foundation to be able to recognize the fallacious reasoning, refute the fallacious reasoning, and give a solid response. Let's go to the scriptures. Now, will that satisfy this guy? No, he's a convert. As long as he's in the honeymoon stage, he's not listening to almost anything I'm saying anyways. So you say, well, why did you spend all the time responding to him? Because other people read it. Other people read it. And I will probably link, I'll probably time index. If I have time to, I've got to speak every night, 5 out of the next 6 nights. And so, you travel during the day, you get set up, you get changed, you run to your speaking thing, you get back, you're tired, may not have time to do it. Maybe somebody else will do it for me. Maybe we have a young man who is doing dividing line clips right now for us. Very thankful that he's doing that. I've already linked to them and be looking for that. I'll try to remember to link in. I just need to get that link and put it in each blog entry for the dividing line. That's what I need to start doing. Maybe he'll clip this whole discussion. That'd be a long segment, but at least most of it. But try to respond, because I'm just not going to sit here and keep typing longer and longer and longer stuff. But hearing a response, providing a response, people hear that and they can see it, and then they can repeat that to others. Maybe they'll copy and paste it. Maybe they'll cut it and save it, whatever. So yeah, I don't expect this guy to be listening. He's in the honeymoon stage. But other people who maybe are coming out of the honeymoon stage and are starting to realize, a lot of the stuff that I was told just isn't panning out. It's really not true. All this unity stuff, I'm actually starting to see that doesn't really exist. People in that condition may not be nearly as vocal as this guy is. He's very vocal. But they're listening. And you can provide them with, maybe the beginnings of their being able to go, yeah, these claims that this is all apostolic, or it just doesn't pan out. It's just, where did I go wrong? And you can direct them back to the sufficiency of Scripture, and to that could be the way to do it. So that's why you do it. So anyway, your criticism of Catholic failures or change the subject? No, it's a demonstration that you don't have answers to the questions you're asking. In your model, everything ultimately collapses into those who have complete fidelity to Scripture possess true authority. Yes, Scripture is God-breathed, and you ain't. Neither is Leo, and neither is the magisterium of the church. So the church has been given Christ's voice in his word. And God's voice has ultimate authority. You got it. That's the difference. You've abandoned that. You don't have God's voice anymore in Scripture. That's the point. Ding, 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 ding. Glad you got it. It's a shame that you traded it for a cheap imitation that is so obviously self-contradictory, if you would just step back long enough to see it. But you won't. So, anyways,